In 1950, Lafayette Ronald Hubbard, an American author and artist, wrote a book called Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health. By August of that year, the book had sold over 55,000 copies, was selling at the rate of 4,000 a week, and was being translated into French, German, and Japanese. Despite the claims in the book being poorly received by the press and the scientific and medical professions, it was so successful that across the US, 500 Dianetic auditing groups were set up. However, in 1952, after a legal dispute with one of his investors, Hubbard lost the rights to Dianetics and bankruptcy proceedings followed. After the demise of Dianetics came the birth of Scientology. At first, Scientology was a very small-scale movement, and as members declined and finances grew tighter, Hubbard reversed his earlier hostility to religion he voiced in Dianetics, and outlined plans for transforming Scientology into a religion. Scientology grew steadily over the next few years, and Hubbard regained the copyrights of Dianetics. He marketed Scientology through various medical claims about restoring good health and seeking cures for illness and mental stability. By the start of the 1960s, Hubbard was the leader of a worldwide movement with thousands of followers, and Scientology became one of the most successful new American faiths to emerge in the past century. So what exactly is Scientology, and what are the beliefs of the millions of people who follow the religion and live their lives by it? Put simply, Scientology is the belief that each human has a reactive mind that responds to life's traumas, clouding the analytical mind and keeping us from experiencing reality. Members of the movement submit to a process called auditing to find the roots of this trauma, reliving past experiences in an effort to neutralize them and reassert the importance of the analytical mind, working towards a spiritual state called clear. The process involves a device called an e-meter. In itself, the e-meter does nothing. It is a crude lie detector used by Scientology auditors to examine a person's mental state. Auditors are specially trained members of Scientology who ask an exact set of questions or directions to help a person locate areas of spiritual distress from their past and current life, working towards freeing their minds. Apparently, when the e-meter is operating and a person holds the meter's electrodes, changes in their mind after being asked certain questions by an auditor influence the tiny flow of electrical energy generated by the e-meter, causing the needle on its dial to move. The needle reactions tell the auditor where the problem lies and what needs to be addressed through additional questions or actions. So successful was the Scientology movement that Hubbard moved into a residence in Hollywood and established Scientology's Celebrity Center International, touting as a spiritual mecca for artists, politicians, leaders of industry, sports figures, and anyone with the power and vision to create a better world. However, Scientology has always had an air of mystery and secrets that only those on the inside are privy to, meaning journalists and other investigators have over the years been fascinated by what really goes on behind the scenes. There have been allegations of mistreatment of members and questionable financial practices, all of which have been denied by the organization. Due to this media scrutiny, Scientology hit controversy after the feds unearthed 2 criminal conspiracies in which Scientologists had endeavored to retaliate against investigations by journalists and to infiltrate law enforcement and assorted government agencies. Hubbard, eager to avoid the controversy, purchased 3 ships and took up residence on one of the ships, of which he named Apollo. Along with several of his followers, he sailed from port to port in the Mediterranean Sea and the eastern North Atlantic. To his staff, he liked to be known as the Commodore, and he outfitted them in naval uniforms, creating a vaguely paramilitary organization he called Sea Org. Membership to Sea Org was restricted to the highest ranking and most devoted Scientologists. Sea Org also included a group called the Commodore's Messengers Organization, and it was no coincidence that a few of these messengers happened to be scantily clad teenage girls. These girls were at the Commodore's beck and call and were responsible for running errands for Hubbard, such as lighting his cigarettes, dressing him, or relaying his verbal commands to other crew members. Among Hubbard's most devoted messengers was 12-year-old Michelle Shelley Barnett, a young girl with strawberry blonde hair. Shelley's father Barney was a handyman who struggled to find work, and her mother Flo had emotional issues. But such was their faith in Scientology that they left Shelley and her older sister Clarice in Hubbard's care. From then on, the only education the girls received was from the Gospel of Hubbard. Shelley was devoted to Hubbard and hung on his every word, following his orders to the letter. Shelley remained on the ship until the mid-1970s, after the Apollo was banned from several Spanish ports, and Hubbard, who was basically on the run, decided to relocate back to the United States to establish a land base for the Sea Org in Florida. Eventually, the Fort Harrison Hotel in Clearwater, Florida was secretly acquired as the location for the land base. However, when the whereabouts of Hubbard leaked out, he left the base and his wife and lived his life on the move. By now his health and mental state were diminished by his paranoia and the ongoing legal investigations into his practices. In 1976, on his 16th birthday, David Miscavige left high school with his father's permission to move to Clearwater, Florida, and joined Hubbard's Sea Org. Miskovich's charisma impressed the messenger girls who had been decamped to Clearwater, but it was Shelley who caught his eye. Their romance began a couple of years later in around 1978. Shelley was devoted to David, although it didn't go down well with some of the other messenger girls, who thought she was status hungry. It seems that although Shelley had spent most of her teenage years within the Scientology community, she had no real friends and was considered to be a very lonely girl. David and Shelley married in 1982 in the Los Angeles area, and instantly became the it couple of Sea Org. By then, Miscavige was in charge of the Watchdog Committee and the All Clear unit established by Hubbard to handle the various legal claims against him. He was also in charge of Author Services Incorporation and was responsible for managing Hubbard's literary and financial affairs. To all intents and purposes, David Miscavige was effectively in control of the Scientology movement. In 1985, Shelley's mother Flo died. In the years leading up to her death, she had been involved with a Scientology splinter group. The move had enraged David Miscavige, and when she was found dead of what police deemed a suicide, there was speculation as to how a 5'3" woman could shoot 4 bullets into her own chest and head with a long rifle. Apparently, Shelley's reaction when she learned of the death of her mother was this. Just a year after Flo's death, Ron Hubbard died, and Scientology's future was officially placed in the hands of David Miscavige. By the time of Hubbard's death, in 1986, Scientology was the it religion. Its followers included movie stars like Tom Cruise and John Travolta, and other well-known celebrities like Kirstie Alley and Anne Archer. One of the first things Miscavige did as chairman of the board was to give his wife a job befitting the First Lady of Scientology. He created the position of COB assistant, which meant Shelley was in charge of the dozen-odd staffers who worked for her husband. In reality, the job required her to be whatever her husband wanted to be at any given moment. Shelley would hover around her husband like an obedient puppy, nodding in appreciation or flashing a huge smile when required. However, there was another female on Miskovich's staff who seemed equally as important as his wife. Her name was Larice Lou Stuckenbrock, a status quo New Zealander who worked as his communicator. By this time, it didn't go unnoticed that Shelley and David's relationship appeared to be more like an employee and her boss. They slept in separate bedrooms and never publicly displayed any affection towards each other. They were viewed as an odd couple. Shelley, however, was very possessive over her husband, and if she felt any female colleagues were getting too close or dressing inappropriately around him, she would voice her anger towards them in no uncertain terms. Shelley started to obsess over her appearance. Her makeup and hair had to be perfect, and her rigid adherence to an all-natural diet made her look increasingly gaunt and unwell. By the mid-1990s, the Church of Scientology claimed a membership of 8 million, and David Miskovic was flying high as its esteemed leader. But as he rose to power, so did his ego and temper, and if things were not done as he wanted, or if something went wrong, it was often Shelley who took the flak. He was known to undermine her decisions, and she often was sent to undo a decision he didn't like to his amended version. However, Shelley was tough, and she could give as good as she got, especially in the treatment of her staff, and she often emulated her husband's quick temper and outbursts. Although those who knew her best claimed that underneath it all she was a nice person, she would encourage staff to volunteer and help the local community, and always made sure their medical needs were met if they fell ill. It was Shelley who often diffused a situation when her husband went too far with one of his rants. However, by 2004, former members claimed Shelley was showing signs of stress. She was run ragged and had trouble sleeping. She was often in a bad mood and took it out on those around her. Many of her staff began to dislike her. In 2006, Shelley was tasked with reshuffling the Sea Org board. Already various Sea Org officers had tried and failed to satisfy David's wishes for improvement, and now it was Shelley's turn. For months she worked around the clock, drafting and redrafting plans, but ultimately it still wasn't good enough for David, and he rejected everything Shelley had worked on. It was around this time that David spent much of his time in Los Angeles, whilst his wife remained at the Gold Base in California. Whilst her husband was away, Shelley made 2 surprise executive decisions, both without David's approval. First, she rearranged staff and informed people of their new titles and duties. Secondly, in order to facilitate renovations on her husband's living quarters, she had some of his belongings boxed up and moved to a temporary housing unit. Within days, former colleagues say, Shelley seemed to know she was living on borrowed time, saying, soon after, Shelley was stripped of all her duties. Now in the head office, it was just David and Lou Stuckenbrock. On November 18, 2006, Katie Holmes and Tom Cruise got married in a very lavish double-ring Scientology wedding in a 15th century castle in Italy. David, who was and still is a close friend of Cruise, was best man. The wedding was attended by a host of A-list celebrities and Scientology members. There was, however, one notable absentee, Shelley Miscavige. The following year, Shelley's father died, and she attended his funeral, appearing to be shadowed by a watchful Scientology member. This was the last time Shelley was seen in public. Suddenly, after decades of being graceful, smiling, and by her husband's side during virtually every meeting, trip, and photo opportunity, she vanished without a trace. Since then, there has been fevered intrigue and speculation as to her whereabouts. Reports say that church members rarely ask about her and know better not to speculate. It is as if the First Lady of Scientology had never existed, and discussing her disappearance was forbidden or dismissed amongst senior members. However, there was one member who persistently asked where Shelley had gone, and her name was Leah Remini. Actress Leah was brought up in Scientology and became concerned when Shelley disappeared, but every time she inquired about her whereabouts, she was told either she was on a special project or she's visiting a sick relative. But when Christmas 2007 came and went, and Leah failed to receive her traditional thank you note from Shelley, her questions became more insistent. However, the harder she pressed, the more the church stonewalled her. In 2013, after more than 30 years as a devout member of Scientology, Leah Remini quit the movement after she grew disenchanted with the church, and in particular its leader David, and fellow Scientologist Tom Cruise. She was fed up of constantly being berated for asking the wrong questions, especially about the unexplained disappearance of Shelley. After leaving the organization, Leah, as other defectors have, began to publicly criticize the organization, and even gave an interview to Oprah Winfrey and released her memoir titled Troublemaker: Surviving Hollywood and Scientology, about her experience with Scientology and reasons for leaving it. She also filed a missing persons report on Shelley Miscavige. However, soon after, the LAPD announced that the case had been closed and ruled the missing persons report as unfounded. It also said that it had met with Shelley but gave no further information. This cryptic explanation just fueled the mystery. Had Shelley fled the church? Was she in hiding? Was she ill? Was she even still alive? Some Scientology defectors believe she was exiled to one of several secretive and heavily guarded bases the church owns in remote Western locations. Those who are sent to these locations endure lives of isolation, menial labor, and poverty. Allegedly, these tightly controlled bases can be found in California, New Mexico, and Wyoming, and serve to protect the church's most precious possessions and operations. For example, Hubbard's writings are engraved on steel tablets, entombed in titanium casings, and buried in underground vaults. However, most defectors and reporters believe Shelley is living at a California base located just outside of LA, near Lake Arrowhead. It's a 500-acre site that is known variously as Twin Peaks or Rim Forest. According to a former Sea Org member who oversaw much of its construction, this particular base includes a luxurious log cabin, primed for the belief Hubbard will one day return, and a second structure designed to protect church VIPs, such as David and Tom Cruise, in the event of a nuclear Armageddon. Allegedly, the only people who enter the vast base are around 20 Sea Org members who live on it full-time, and consider it an honor because they are safeguarding the word of Hubbard. This is despite the fact that the base is monitored around the clock by armed guards, infrared cameras, and spiked fences, similar to a prison. There is no real contact with the outside world, and mail and phone calls are monitored. It is, however, the perfect place to have someone disappear. Those defectors who knew Shelley claim if she is at one of the bases, and there is no proof she is, then it would be because she wants to be there, not because she has been made to go there. However, this is up for debate. Others speculate that Shelley knows too much about Scientology and her husband, and would be too much of a risk. To date, there has been no plausible explanation why Shelley Miscavige, the wife of the highest-ranking member of Scientology, has not been seen publicly for over 13 years. Surely, if only to diffuse the speculation, you would think Miscavige or one of his representatives would make a statement about her withdrawal from public life and give an update on her well-being or whereabouts. All they have said is that she is not missing and devotes her time to the work of the Church of Scientology. In December 2018, a lawyer representing the church told a newspaper that Miscavige is a dedicated Sea Org member who lives a private life. As far as anyone knows, the Miscaviges are still married, although it seems in name only. In a world where everyone knows everything about everyone, it seems impossible that such a public figure can simply be erased without explanation. So the question remains, where is Shelley Miscavige?